Hi reading group, I hope you are doing well and staying safe. As I mentioned in class on Wednesday, you all will have the choice to either take the class in person, which means that you will attend class on Monday and Wednesday mornings throughout the semester, or you may prefer to take the class fully online. If you're taking the class in person, you're also welcome to watch these videos. If you are taking them online, make sure that you are always watching these videos, because they will help prepare you for the content for the week, kind of contextualize where we are with this literacy conversation, and then also give you more details on the assignment that you guys will be completing for the week. So as I mentioned Wednesday, even though we started class this week, next week is going to be week 1, the week that says complexity. That way the discussions and the assignments line up with the actual week that we're on. And so as a reminder, in order to find that content, you will click into week 1. And you see the text that we're going to be reading and the TED Talk that you're going to be viewing for this week. So to get us started, we are going to be tackling first the broader question about what it means to be literate. And you will notice that in the Beers, which is this book, the Beers Chapter 1, the first chapter paints kind of a broader picture and considers questions just about how we determine success, also specific to literacy, but just in general, how we determine success in schools and how that affects students differently, and then therefore what our response is as teachers. So the first chapter just kind of gets you into this whole idea of literacy and success and education, the education system, and some of those bigger questions. The next chapter that you guys are going to be reading, which is also in the Beers textbook, which is Teaching English Language Arts in a Flat World. Now, I know that it says Teaching English Language Arts, and many of you are not going to teach English language arts. However, in that chapter, Burke is going to be talking about skills that he says are essential for 21st century literacy demands. And so these are skills that will go across all of your different content areas. And talks about how in the past we always kind of had these like hard skills. If you were literate, it meant that you could read, you could write, you could speak, those like very core characteristic of what it means to be literate. If you could pick up a book and read it, you were literate. Nowadays, in the 21st century, we know that literacy is not that simple, right? Literacy is engaging with a variety of text. So those might be images that maybe students looking at text on a screen as opposed to just the printed textbooks. And then beyond that, he talks quite a bit about these soft skills in terms of what does it mean to be literate nowadays. So somebody, for example, who has skills that are transferable. Somebody, for example, who can synthesize among their skills. Somebody who is able to collaborate. And so as you read this chapter, I encourage you from your own perspective, if you're going to be a science teacher, math teacher, PE teacher, to ask this question of what does it mean to be literate in your content area? And then specifically, which of the skills that Jim Burke mentions do you feel like are ones that are especially important in your content area? So what does it mean to be literate as a high school science student, for example? Because we're going to be talking about that in class on Monday. And those of you who are taking the class online are going to be discussing that in the online discussion forum. Beyond that, then, you guys will be reading from the Hinchman text. And the Hinchman text is going to get more specifically into this idea of text complexity. So we know anytime that a kid picks up a book, right, or you're going to hand a book to a student, that there are going to be factors that will influence the extent to which a student can comprehend the text that you are putting in front of them. And so those are the factors that Hinchman's going to be talking about in this book in terms of quantitative factors. So those are things that we can even put a number on. You may have heard of like Lexile before, where they put a number on a Lexile level for a text. So they're going to see how long the sentences are, how complicated the content is, how complicated the vocabulary is, and there's essentially a formula for determining how complex a text is quantitatively. However, we know that it's not just quantitative factors that influence students' ability to comprehend a text, but there are also what we call qualitative factors. So one of those may even be a student's interest in reading a text. So what are some of the things that students may not be ready for qualitative, even if they're ready quantitatively? So for example, If I'm having students read a text that is from a Middle Eastern perspective in a middle school classroom, my students may be able to read the text. However, if my students don't have any background information about what life is like for a 12-year-old in the Middle East, that student may not have the background information that they need to be able to comprehend the text. So one of those qualitative factors may be that my students don't have the cultural background to be able to understand the text, which then as a teacher, that tells me what I need to do to make that student more accessible to a student. And that's what we're going to be getting into next week in terms of once we know what might make a text complicated or what are those barriers to students being able to understand it, what do we then do as teachers to make that text more accessible to them. And I'll get to more of that in just a minute. Lastly, though, you guys are going to be watching a TED Talk from John Green, which I hope you find entertaining. You may know him from his crash courses, but where he just talks about as somebody who nowadays is a proficient reader, a prolific writer, but his experience with text in schools and how that changes. So I think that you will find that interesting and thinking about that in light of what else you're reading about what does it mean to be literate in schools and in the world today. So in terms of what you're going to be doing with that information, those of you who are face-to-face, I will see you guys Monday morning. And we are going to be discussing many of those questions that I've just stated in terms of what it means to be literate. Those of you who are taking the class online, you will, by the end of the evening on Thursday, September, that would be September 12, 11, 10, 9, I believe off the top of my head, but by Thursday at midnight, you all will be posting your response to the course text. Make sure that you have fully read all the course text and that you are citing them in your responses to earn all of the points. So you will be reading the text, watching the TED Talk, and then engaging in a discussion where you will first post and then you will respond to at least 2 of your classmates by midnight on Sunday. So you guys will be engaging in the discussion electronically. Those of you who are face-to-face, you guys will be engaging in the discussion in class on Monday. Then by Sunday at midnight, those of you who are in class, you guys will also be able to work on this in class on Wednesday. You may even get it done in class on Wednesday. But either way, everyone will complete an assignment where you are going to be focusing specifically on text complexity factors and what makes a text complex. So for this assignment, as I mentioned, there are the quantitative factors, which are kind of numbers we can put on a text. You can find out if you go to like Lexile.com. Usually the text that you'll be using in your schools that they'll be providing will be within an appropriate Lexile level range for your students. For like average 7th graders, maybe a little too high for your bottom 25%, maybe a little too easy for your top 25%, which is something we're going to get into with differentiation. But in general, you know, the text that would be age appropriate for those kiddos. And so we are going to be thinking instead about what might make a text complex when it comes to the qualitative factors. So this analysis is actually from another literacy textbook that I have that I just really like the way that they ask us to analyze a text in terms of the qualitative factors. And so you are going to be choosing a text, and I'll mention more about that just in a minute because I have sample texts that you're welcome to choose from unless you would want to go out and find one. And you are going to be going through and you are going to be completing this and indicating whether you think for each of these categories it's lower complexity or higher complexity, and then give me a brief rationale for why that is the case. So for example, you may say that within the language section that the content in and of itself may not be too tricky, but the language is pretty tricky. There may be difficult words, and I'm thinking about like in a scientific text that you may say, well, the content or the concept isn't that difficult, but the students are going to be exposed to several words that they have never been a part of their regular vocabulary. So I'm going to say in language that it's a higher complexity and then explain, you know, what I just said. For the structure, you know, I'm thinking of something like a math text, where we know with a math text that we don't only want students like reading the words, like they can read these words, but they may not be familiar that there's like tables or there are images or there are symbols that are going to go along with the text that they're reading. And so that may be something that is particularly challenging for students. Or like I mentioned with an example from a Middle Eastern text, is my students may just not have any background lived experience with whatever it is that they're reading about. So they can understand it. The vocab isn't too tricky, but they really don't have the cultural background to read a text, and so, or the experience that they need to read a text, and so that might make it tricky. I'm thinking about even a health text, for example. As you're engaging with students with, some of these, different topics that may be a little bit sensitive, you may say, well, my students may not have any experience with this, and so that's something that I'm going to have to keep in mind as they're reading it for them to be able to understand the text that they're reading. So you're going to go through, you're going to say whether it's lower or higher based on the description, and then give me just a little brief rationale within this box. And then after that, you're going to go through and similarly answer these questions about the complexity of a text. And again here, this is, like I said, from another textbook from Beers and Probst, but where you are going to take a text that you would be giving to students and asking yourself these questions. And some of them may not be applicable, that's okay. You can just put that it's not specifically, applicable. But as you're answering these questions, think about a text that in general would be appropriate to, if it's a 7th grade text, thinking about these questions related to 7th graders as you're going through your average 7th grader. Does it seem like they are intellectually capable, or is this something that's going to be stretching? So for example, you may say, well, of course, it's a 7th grade textbook. However, an example of this is a lot of 7th graders read 7th graders may be reading about a story where, something horrible happened to, a family or something like that. And you may say, maybe the student is smart enough for this, but this may be very sensitive. It may be, difficult or challenging for them in different ways. You may be stretching them with the text, like 7th graders will read Edgar Allan Poe, which they may be able to understand, but it's kind of tricky. Or they may be talking about things that happened during Shakespeare's time, which students may be smart enough, but they may not fully understand the historical time period. So those are just a couple of examples, and it really depends on your content area. But thinking through what still might be some barriers if you're giving 7th grade students a text that in general students would be able to comprehend, but you're going to have to make decisions about how you're going to scaffold that text in order for them to best be able to do so. So at the very end of this, I've asked you a couple of questions about, okay, you've gone through this whole analysis. What might be the greatest barriers to students comprehending the text that you have chosen, and start to brainstorm ideas of how you might handle that. And then for next week, we're going to talk about all different ideas for comprehension strategies to help close that gap between this is where my students are and this is what they need in terms of their background and their intellect and their experiences to engage with that text. So in terms of choosing a text, I do have several sample texts that you all are able to choose from. So if you scroll down from the first page where it says sample text, on this page there are quite a few samples. I believe I have everyone's major represented, but if I don't, let me know and I can help you find that. So you're welcome to just use some of these samples that I have posted for you. Another option that you have, if you don't see something that you particularly like here that you want to use, is you can always go online and say, Google just 7th grade sample math textbook, and for all of your subject areas, there should be some good sample text that you are able to use. You may have text from practicum or from your own experiences, and that's fine as well. But using and finding a sample text that then you will apply the assignment to. That should be it for this week. Of course, always reach out to me, especially if you're online. Don't hesitate to email or stop in if you do have any questions. And then those of you who are going to be taking the class in person, I will look forward to seeing you all Monday morning. Make sure that you have read the chapters and then you have viewed the TED Talk so that you come to class on Monday morning ready to talk about everything that you are thinking about while you are reading. Have a great weekend.